After years of mystery, a new claim about Madeleine McCann has caught attention. Could a woman really be the missing girl? Discover what we know so far. It all began when Julia, a young woman, decided to break the silence. She looked at a photo of Madeleine McCann, so emblematic in posters and news for years, and felt something different. It wasn't just the resemblance that caught her attention, but a connection she couldn't ignore. It was as if she was looking at a part of herself. Gradually, the doubts Julia had about her own story began to transform into something much bigger. Could she be Madeleine McCann? This idea, which seemed absurd to many, made more and more sense to her. Julia grew up in an environment she described as full of gaps. There were photos of her childhood, but nothing that traced back to her early years. The stories she heard from her family didn't seem to fit with what she felt. Even the few memories she had from childhood were hazy, as if something was missing. It was only when she began making detailed comparisons between her physical characteristics and those of Madeleine that everything started to take shape. The shape of the eyes, the structure of the face. Moreover, Madeleine's famous eye mark, the distinct spot on the iris, seemed to be present in her own eye. From there, Julia decided she needed answers. Her decision to share her suspicions publicly on social media was a turning point. Suddenly, her story was no longer just a personal doubt, it became a matter of global interest. But with that came difficult questions. Why did she only decide to speak out now? And more importantly, what could the authorities do with this information? As Julia became a widely debated topic, experts began to analyze her story. Psychologists were the first to try to understand her motivations. Could it be possible that Julia was dealing with some unresolved trauma? Or was it a case of identity confusion? Although many questioned the legitimacy of her claims, one thing was clear. Julia was seeking answers to something she truly believed to be true. At this point, a scientific analysis began to be considered. After all, in cases like this, there is no room for ambiguities. A DNA test would be the only way to confirm or deny her story. But even before any test was conducted, the comparisons between Julia and Madeleine were taken to another level. Facial biometrics experts evaluated their photos side by side. Although opinions were divided, the results pointed to a sufficient similarity to warrant an investigation. However, skepticism still hung in the air. Were these coincidences simply that? Coincidences? The story also reignited debates among investigators of the McCann case. A central point of controversy was the issue of time. Madeleine disappeared in 2007, and Julia only had fragments of memories that could align with that period. But none of this was clear enough to draw a conclusion. The fact that Julia did not remember important details, such as the names of her childhood caregivers, added more mystery to the situation. And while the media was split between supporting or criticizing her story, the search for answers intensified. Julia was not alone in her journey. Thousands of people around the world began to follow her case closely, dividing into supporters to finally bring closure to the world's most famous case. Others accused her of seeking attention or even trying to profit from the McCann tragedy. However, the question remains, what if she is telling the truth? The major twist in this scenario will be the realization of the DNA test. So far, there is no public confirmation that Julia has taken the test. If positive, it will change the course of the story, giving the McCanns an answer they have been seeking for nearly 2 decades. But if negative, the enigma of who Julia really is and why her story carries so many coincidences with Madeleine's remains. Julia did more than cast a doubt. She opened a global debate, but as her story attracted attention, contradictions arose that challenge her narrative. And this is where the case begins to take an even more mysterious turn. One of the first points questioned by critics was her own timeline. Julia stated that over the years she felt something in her childhood didn't make sense. However, her lack of specific recollections and objective details raised doubts. How could someone who claims to be Madeleine McCann have no clear memories of the significant events that led to the girl's disappearance in 2007? Moreover, her reported age does not exactly match Madeleine's, as Julia would be a few years older than Madeleine should be currently. But interestingly, there was no official document proving her true date of birth. Another detail that caused controversy was Julia's claim about Madeleine's characteristic eye mark, known as coloboma. Although photos and videos of Julia show something similar, experts point out that the resemblance could just be a coincidence. This mark, which has always been a key piece in identifying Madeleine, became a point of tension in the case. Was it real evidence or just another element that further confused the scenario? When psychologists analyzed Julia, one point stood out. Her behavior could be interpreted as a search for answers, but also as a reflection of unresolved traumas. It wouldn't be the first time someone, facing gaps in their identity, seeks answers in public stories. But this does not automatically disqualify her claim. In fact, it only reinforces the need for concrete evidence, such as the long-awaited DNA test. Meanwhile, public opinion began to divide. On one side, there were those who believed Julia might be seeking fame or attention, especially considering her massive exposure on social media. On the other, many argued that even if she wasn't Madeleine, her story deserved to be taken seriously. After all, if Julia is wrong, it does not diminish the fact that she might be facing a real personal crisis. And if she is right, the search for answers is not only hers, but of a family that has been waiting for nearly 2 decades. Another point raised by investigators was the absence of concrete evidence to support Julia's initial claims. There is no record so far that directly links her story to Madeleine's disappearance. The context in which she was raised, the details about her adoptive family, and even the places where she spent her childhood remain shrouded in mystery. This makes analyzing her narrative a challenge, as the gaps leave room for speculation, both to support and to discredit her story. But the most crucial moment was when comparisons between Julia and Madeleine began to be examined from a more scientific perspective. Facial biometrics experts analyzed the photos, highlighting similar characteristics between the two. However, many warn that facial similarities, as intriguing as they may be, are not sufficient to determine identity. So far, no DNA test has been conducted publicly, leaving the conclusion of this chapter still pending. The Julia case goes beyond Madeleine McCann. It reflects something bigger about the human quest for belonging, identity, and answers. People around the world connected to her story because, deep down, it touches on something universal, the desire to fill gaps in our own existence. But with so many questions still unanswered, we are left wondering, how much truth is there in this narrative? This uncertainty, as frustrating as it may be, is also what keeps the public hooked on every new development. Whether to prove that Julia is truly Madeleine, or to understand what led a young woman to believe this so deeply, the mystery is far from being solved. Julia Wendell, the woman who claims to be Madeleine McCann, has brought a new chapter to a case that has lasted 17 years. But contrary to what many expected, her narrative did not bring clear answers, only more questions. One of the first contradictions to emerge was her age. Officially, Madeleine would be 19 years old today, while Julia claims to be 21. Although she maintains that her documents might have been falsified, the 2-year discrepancy would already be enough to discredit her story. But others believe that the possibility of fraud in Julia's records should be investigated more thoroughly before any definitive conclusion. Another point that generated controversy was Julia's description of her childhood. She says she has few clear memories of her biological family and believes her adoptive parents hid important facts about her past. This gap in memory, although understandable, fueled suspicions that Julia might be fabricating her story. Still, psychologists who analyze the case suggest that her statements could be a reflection of significant trauma, which would explain the absence of concrete details. It is this mix of truth, doubt, and emotion that makes her narrative so intriguing. The most talked about moment, however, was Julia's claim of having the same characteristic eye mark as Madeleine, the coloboma. Photographs shared by her show a slight imperfection in her eye, but experts pointed out that this feature is not as rare as imagined. Madeleine's mark has always been treated as a unique identifier, but now with Julia presenting something similar, the debate has resurfaced strongly. Is this a sign that she is telling the truth, or just a coincidence that ended up fueling her suspicions? Additionally, the analysis of Julia's appearance also divided opinions. Some people noticed similarities between her and Madeleine's parents, while others argued that such comparisons are subjective and often influenced by the desire to find answers. To resolve this issue, Julia publicly requested a DNA test, but so far no concrete evidence has been released to support or refute her claim. The media played a crucial role in this case, amplifying doubts and theories from both sides. Many media outlets treated Julia's story with skepticism, highlighting inconsistencies in her account. Others, however, approached the case with more empathy, recognizing that even if Julia isn't Madeleine, her search for identity is something that deserves attention. This divided approach reflects the complexity of the case itself. It's not just about Julia, but about how we handle doubts and the emotional impact that stories like this generate. Public pressure was also immense. While some people supported Julia and called for more detailed investigations, others accused her of seeking attention. She received both support and severe criticism, raising a fundamental question: how much are we willing to give the benefit of the doubt in such cases? Even if she isn't Madeleine, it's possible that Julia is a victim of a troubled past, which would make her story even more tragic. Throughout the entire case, it is clear that we are not dealing only with evidence and proofs, but with deep human emotions. Julia represents, in a way, the desperation of someone seeking answers, and that in itself says a lot about the complexity of this case. After all, Madeleine McCann remains one of the greatest mysteries of recent times, and any hope of resolution attracts worldwide attention. Julia Wendell brought to light one of the most polarizing moments in the history of the Madeleine McCann case. When she decided to publicly claim that she could be Madeleine, it seemed like a bolt of lightning in a mystery that has remained shrouded in darkness for years. But the question everyone wants to know continues to linger. Is there something concrete to support this declaration? Experts were quick to evaluate and bring up points that simultaneously intrigue and confuse even more. Initially, an important detail caught attention. Julia said she believed her eye mark was the same characteristic that made Madeleine stand out in disappearance posters around the world. This detail caused an uproar among people following the case, but also raised many doubts. When analyzing photographs, ophthalmology experts explain that coloboma is not an exclusive condition and can occur in different degrees of intensity in people from different backgrounds. This would not rule out the possibility, but it also did not provide any guarantee that she was who she claimed to be. And it is precisely this tension between doubt and hope that keeps the case alive. Besides the issue of coloboma, there is another central piece that connects Julia to the case: her request for a DNA test. This request is indeed a bold and direct move, but so far the silence of the McCann family and the authorities on the subject has brought more questions than answers. And there is a clear reason for this. DNA tests are powerful tools, but only when used in the right context. Julia simply wishing for the test may not be enough to justify an immediate official response, especially considering the emotional and legal implications of a negative or positive result. The most disturbing point, however, came from a testimony Julia gave. The adoptive parents she grew up with were incredibly evasive about her past, and she claimed to have discovered inconsistencies in personal documents, including her birth certificate. This narrative raised an even broader question. Is Julia, regardless of being Madeleine or not, a victim of a possible identity switch? Psychologists who analyzed the case pointed out that this feeling of disconnection could be a natural response to trauma or the lack of clear answers in the family environment. Perhaps the most shocking detail was the absence of consistent school records of Julia during her childhood, something that, according to her, strengthens her thesis that she was a victim of a cover-up. However, critics argued that this lack of records could be explained in other ways, such as frequent changes of residence or less organized educational systems. And this is where the real dilemma arises. What is a real clue, and what is just a subjective interpretation? More than that, Julia brought with her an emotional twist. She believes that her fragmented childhood memories could be the keys to uncovering her true identity. These fragments include flashes of a place she cannot identify, but which she somehow believes is connected to Praia da Luz in Portugal, where Madeleine disappeared. Investigations into similar cases suggest that fragmented memories can be both revealing and misleading, especially when mixed with years of longing for answers. Media coverage around this story is also an essential part of this block. While some outlets amplified her claims, others quickly dismissed the possibility of Julia being Madeleine, based on a superficial analysis of the available facts. This created a curious phenomenon. The narrative split between those who believe she deserves to be heard and those who think her story only hinders an investigation already full of conflicting theories. Even more intriguing was the involvement of amateur detectives who began to compare photos and documents publicly shared by Julia with old records of the McCann family. Although many of these efforts seemed well-intentioned, they also raised concerns about the psychological impact Julia might suffer in the face of enormous public exposure. After all, even if she isn't Madeleine, her search for answers has already placed her under a level of scrutiny that few could withstand. Julia Wendell's story raises more questions than answers, and perhaps that is the greatest impact of this case so far. Are we facing a legitimate path to finally clarify one of the most painful mysteries of recent history? Or is this just another layer of uncertainty added to the Madeleine McCann case? The fact is that the presented elements, from fragmented memories to inconsistencies in Julia's past, are, at the very least, provocative. My personal opinion? I believe that every possibility of bringing answers to the Madeleine case should be taken seriously. No matter how unlikely a claim may seem, it should be investigated thoroughly and respectfully, not only to put an end to the suffering of those involved, but also to preserve the dignity of those seeking legitimate answers to their own stories. Julia deserves to be heard, but with the same caution that a serious investigation demands. Until DNA provides a definitive answer, the debate will continue, and with it, the shadow of the mystery that has persisted for so long. And speaking of mysteries, Julia Wendell's story is just one of the many threads connected to the Madeleine McCann case. If you think this episode was surprising, wait until the next video, where we will address another fundamental piece that has been completely ignored for years. Is it closer than we imagine? There's only one way to find out. If you've watched this far, leave in the comments, "I am a truth seeker, so I know you made it to the end and are as involved as I am in this search." Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapters of this investigation. And of course, if you have any viewpoints or suggestions for other topics, share them in the comments. Let's try to piece this puzzle together. See you in the next video.